Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to briefly just talk to everyone about a study that's making its rounds in all the circles that I frequent. And it is a study that does essentially back what I'm always telling people, but I want to remind people that the fitness world, the training world, the bodybuilding world, you're the only people in the world who will actually change their lifestyle based upon one or two studies. In no other area of science would anybody consider that reasonable or rational. If all you can produce is 2 or 3 studies done on 20, 30 people in regards to some changes in your training, in your diet, or your supplementation, that is actually not, at least scientifically speaking, a good reason to do that. I can absolutely assure you, and I know Alex Viada wrote an article on this the other day, of no medical doctor would ever change the protocol for a patient based upon 2 or 3 studies. Ever. In fact, they would be pretty much guilty of malpractice if they did. Yet people in the training world, they want to say, oh, well, I saw a study. I saw 2 studies showing something that this was effective or wasn't effective. And that's suddenly their basis. Well, guys, it doesn't work that way. And oftentimes studies are done and they only look at one little element. They're not a long-term, 3-year-long study done on 300, 400, 500 people to where they actually map all the changes over time. Oftentimes they look at a single biomarker. Now this study was 8 weeks. That's part of the problem with it. It was only 30 people. That's another problem. But this study, and it is linked below, essentially showed what I do tell people is that massive amounts of protein don't actually help you gain muscle. I would say that as far as data goes, large amounts of protein are helpful for cutting, they're helpful for losing body fat, for controlling calories, both through their appetite suppressing effect and their thermic effect. Large amounts of protein beyond a certain threshold doesn't do anything for helping you gain muscle mass. Nothing measurable, and there's a few studies that people say will contradict that, but they're in the minority. They're not the majority. Most reasonable sports nutritionists don't advocate people eat 300 grams of protein a day, even a 200-pound athlete. They just don't. There's no need for it. But this study, what it studied was average age of the person was 24 years old. I think the average weight was around 72 kilos starting out of 30 people. They took half of them, put them in a high protein group, half of them in a control group. Now the average protein intake in the high protein group was 308 grams per day. They went with 4.4 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is the equivalent of 2 grams per pound of body weight. This is double what a lot of people tell you need. And the control group went with the standard amount that's often recommended. They had them on approximately 138 grams was the average. And I always tell you guys, for most of you, 100 to 150 grams is fine, these are standard recommendations. Usually 1 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which is less than a gram per pound, is enough for most of you to make ideal gains in muscle mass, with a few exceptions. And that's what they did. And the results of the 8-week study showed that there was no changes between the 2 groups because they kept their training the same. They told you guys, keep training how you've been training. Don't really adjust anything. Just keep doing whatever sort of protocol you've been doing. The high protein group gained no more muscle than the control group. There was no change in their fat-free mass, their fat mass, so neither group on average gained or lost more fat than the other, and there was no change in body composition or body fat percentage between the 2 that was any sort of significance. Meaning, yeah, they all made some progress in 8 weeks, but the high protein group didn't make any more progress than the control group. And that's what I would expect to see. And I would remind people, though, that this is not a study that you could take home to the bank. You can't use this study in isolation and say, hey, this is great, because it was only 8 weeks. It was only 30 people. Doesn't look like their individual calories were closely tracked. They were self-reported, and as a general rule in nutrition, you never, ever, ever use self-reported food intake, particularly calories, because you cannot trust people to do that. We know for a fact, in study after study, that people will screw that up. So that, I would say, that is the biggest flaw in the study that makes it not as viable as I'd like, is that it was self-reported food intake. Had they done this and they measured all their foods for them and kept them in some sort of facility where they could monitor what they eat, this would be a tremendously stronger study. But because people kept a food log, it unfortunately, at least from a nutritional science perspective, makes this study not very good. Not as strong as it should be or could be. All right, guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go.